Today is Good Friday, the day on which Jesus was crucified. So today we will have a tenebrae service. Tenebrae means in the darkness or the shadows. It will be a series of readings that take us with Jesus to the cross. When it was evening, he took his place with the 12, and while they were eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." And they became greatly distressed, and began to say to him, one after another, "Surely not I, Lord." But he answered, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man goes as is written of him, but woe to the one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that one not to have been born." Judas, who betrayed him, said, "Surely not I, Rabbi." And Jesus replied, "You have said so." From Matthew also. When they had sung this hymn, they went out to the Mount Olives. Then Jesus said to them, "You will all become deserters because of me this night, for it is written, 'I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered.' But after I am raised up, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." And Peter said to him, "Though all become deserters because of you, I will never desert you." And Jesus said to Peter, "Truly I tell you, this very night, before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter said to him, "Even though I must die with you, I will not deny you." So said all the disciples. From Luke 22. He came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. When he reached the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not come into the time of trial." Then he withdrew from them about a stone's throw. He knelt down and he prayed, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." Then an angel from heaven appeared to him and gave him strength. In his anguish he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down on the ground. When he got up from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping, and because of his grief, he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray that you may not come into the time of trial." Mark, the evangelist, describes Jesus' civil trial before the Roman governor in these words. "Now it was the custom at the feast to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. "Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate, knowing it was knowing that it was out of envy that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to him. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. "What shall I do then with the one you call the King of Jews?" And they answered, "Crucify him!" "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him!" Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. Historians have described death by crucifixion as the cruelest and most hideous punishment possible. The Roman government used it as a terrorist tactic. They reserved the method of execution for the most violent criminals and for those who had committed high treason. Prisoners were flogged in preparation for crucifixion. These floggings were so violent that in and of themselves, they often caused death. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into Praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand and knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. At the execution site, criminals were offered a drink of wine mixed with myrrh. This would dull the pain somewhat as the soldiers nailed the spikes through the prisoner's hands and feet. Jesus refused this drink. He wanted to keep his senses clear. Criminals were then stripped naked, the humiliation and shame adding to their anguish. After the prisoner was nailed to the crossbar, the cross was raised and dropped into a hole prepared for it. Hanging in this position, the weight of the prisoner's own body made breathing difficult. To prolong the suffering, the Romans placed a small wooden block just under the victim's feet. Using the block, the victim could push his body up long enough to take a deep breath. When death finally came, sometimes days later, it resulted from the combined effects of exposure, thirst, and eventually asphyxiation in the lungs filled with water. As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. They came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. There they offered Jesus wine to drink, mixed with gall, but after tasting it, he refused to drink it. When they had crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots, and sitting down, they kept watch over him there. Above his head, they placed a written charge against him. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who had passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God." In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in the God. Let God rescue him now." If he wants, for he said, "I am the Son of God." And in the same way, robbers who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him. Jesus hangs in the hot sun, stripped, flogged, and bleeding for all to see. The nails pierce his hands and feet, while the insults of the crowd pierce his heart. As in his ministry, so too in his death, Jesus is accounted among the outcasts of society. Criminals hang on either side, and they add their insults to those of the crowd who stand near the 3 crosses on Golgotha that day. Even as they taunt Jesus, he is dying to win forgiveness for them. The shepherd dies for sheep that love to wander. An extreme sacrifice. Jesus in love laid aside his power, position, and authority. He shed his own life's blood, drop by drop, with you in mind. As he died, he thought of you and of me. From Luke. One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God?" he said. "Since you are under the same sentence, we are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus answered, "I tell you the truth, today you will be with me in paradise." From John 19. From the 6th hour until the 9th hour, darkness came over all the land. About the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing there heard it, they said, "He's calling Elijah." Immediately one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a stick, and offered it to Jesus to drink. But the rest said, "No, leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him." Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn into two, from the top to the bottom. The earth shook and the rocks split. Having said this, he breathed his last. And when the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God and said, "Certainly this man was innocent." And when all the crowds who had gathered there for this spectacle saw what had taken place, they returned home and beating their breasts. But all his acquaintances, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance, watching these things. After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, though a secret one because of his fear of the Jews, asked Pilate to let him take away the body of Jesus. Pilate gave him permission, so he came and removed his body. Nicodemus, who had at first come to Jesus by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, weighing about 100 pounds. They took the body of Jesus and wrapped it with the spices in linen cloths, according to the burial custom of the Jews. Now there was a garden in the place where he was crucified, and in the garden there was a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. And so, because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. Sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble. Were you there when they nailed him to the cross? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble.